The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the maintenance bay of Sterling Manufacturing, casting harsh shadows across workbenches cluttered with tools and oil-stained rags. Finn Carter wiped his hands on a worn cloth, his fingers tracing the familiar grooves of a wrench he had owned for 7 years. The metal felt like an extension of his own hand now, worn smooth in all the right places from thousands of repairs. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, the kind of December storm that made the old factory building creak and groan like a ship at sea. Wind rattled the industrial windows, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn called through the white darkness. He checked his watch, 6:15 in the evening. Callista would be waiting at Mrs. Henderson's apartment 3 blocks away, probably holding that threadbare teddy bear she refused to sleep without. The bear's left ear hung by a thread, its fur matted from being clutched through nightmares and fevers. It had been his wife's last gift before the accident, and now it served as both comfort and reminder that some losses never truly heal. They simply become part of the landscape of a life. Finn closed his toolbox with a metallic click that echoed through the empty bay. Then the alarm screamed to life. The sound pierced through the building like a knife, sharp and insistent. Red emergency lights began rotating in the hallway, painting everything in urgent flashes that turned the familiar space into something alien and threatening. Finn's body moved before his mind fully processed the danger. Years of military training kicked in assess, prioritize, act. He sprinted toward the central manufacturing floor, his work boots pounding against concrete, each step echoing in the suddenly empty corridors. The temperature gauge near the main production line showed numbers climbing into dangerous territory: 180 degrees, 190, 200. The hydraulic cooling system had failed, and without it, the massive presses would overheat, the seals would rupture, and pressurized fluid heated to steam would explode outward with enough force to shred metal. If the pressure release valve did not engage in the next 3 minutes, the entire line would explode, taking half the building with it and anyone still inside. Finn could hear voices shouting from the evacuation exits, supervisors herding workers toward safety, the organized chaos of a drill they had practiced but never expected to use. But he turned toward the machinery instead, toward the heat and the danger, because someone had to, and he knew how. The valve control panel was located behind the main hydraulic press, a cramped space thick with steam and the acrid smell of overheating metal. Finn squeezed through the narrow gap, feeling heat radiate through his jacket. His hands found the manual override wheel, rusted from years of automated operation. He threw his full weight into turning it. Nothing. The metal refused to budge. Sweat dripped into his eyes, mixing with condensation from the steam. The pressure gauge needle climbed past the red line. Finn braced his foot against the wall and pulled again, muscles screaming in protest. The wheel moved 1 inch, 2 inches, 3. Steam erupted from the release valve with a deafening hiss. The pressure gauge needle began to drop. Slowly. The emergency alarm faded to silence. Finn stood in the dark, breathing hard, his hands raw and bleeding from the rusted metal, when he emerged from behind the machinery. The floor supervisor and 2 security guards stared at him with expressions caught between gratitude and shock. Word spread quickly. By the time Finn collected his jacket and headed toward the exit, workers he barely knew were clapping him on the shoulder, calling him a hero. He shrugged off the praise, uncomfortable with the attention. He had simply done what needed doing. But as he pushed through the main doors into the cold night air, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up directly in front of him. The rear door opened. A woman's voice, crisp and commanding, cut through the wind. "Mr. Carter, a moment, please." Vivian Sterling did not wait for permission. She stepped out of the vehicle, her charcoal coat pristine despite the storm. her dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested both elegance and absolute control. Behind her, an assistant held an umbrella against the snow. Vivian's eyes, sharp and calculating, assessed Finn in a single sweep. "You saved my factory tonight," she said. $20 million in equipment and contracts, not to mention the lives of the night shift workers. She reached into her coat and produced a cream-colored envelope. "This is $10,000. Consider it a token of appreciation." Finn looked at the envelope, then at the woman holding it. He recognized her now, Vivian Sterling, the CEO whose face occasionally appeared in business news segments on the small television in his apartment. She stood before him like a figure from another world, offering money with the casual ease of someone for whom $10,000 meant nothing. "I was doing my job," Finn said quietly. "Keep your money." The words hung in the cold air between them. Vivian's expression shifted, surprise flickering across features that had been carefully composed. Her assistant stepped forward, confusion evident. "Mr. Carter, perhaps you do not understand. This is—" "I understand," Finn interrupted, his voice still gentle but firm. "Someone had to fix the valve. I was there. That does not make it worth $10,000. He nodded politely to Vivian. "Ma'am." Then he turned and walked away, snow crunching under his boots, leaving the CEO standing beside her sedan with an unclaimed envelope in her hand. Vivian watched him disappear into the storm. No one in her world refused money. Contractors padded their invoices, executives negotiated bonuses, board members leveraged every advantage. Money was the language everyone spoke, the currency that moved all transactions. Yet this maintenance worker had walked away from $10,000 as if it were an insult. She returned to the sedan, her mind already turning over possibilities. "Find out everything about him," she told her assistant. "Everything." The investigation took 48 hours. Finn Carter, 34 years old, widower, single father to a 7-year-old daughter named Callista, former military engineer, honorably discharged after his wife's death in a car accident 3 years prior. Worked double shifts at Sterling Manufacturing to cover rent and medical bills for his daughter's asthma treatments. Lived in a modest apartment in the industrial district. No debt beyond standard monthly expenses, no criminal record, no social media presence. A ghost in the modern world. Invisible, except for his daughter and his work. Vivian read the report in her office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower. City lights glittering below like a constellation laid flat. Behind her, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline she had spent 20 years learning to command. Her father, William Sterling, had built this company from nothing, and she had inherited not just his business, but his battles. The board wanted her out. They whispered about her age, her gender, her decisions. Clinton Ward, the chief financial officer her father had once trusted, led the opposition with surgical precision. She needed something or someone that could not be bought, could not be leveraged, could not be compromised. She needed Finn Carter, not for his skills with machinery, but for his integrity. And she had exactly one way to test if that integrity was real or simply the pride of a poor man offered too little. The boardroom on the 42nd floor smelled of leather and old money. 12 directors sat around a table of polished mahogany, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Clinton Ward occupied the seat to Vivian's immediate right, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting an image of seasoned wisdom. He smiled at her with the warmth of a knife hidden in silk. "Vivian, we appreciate your dedication, truly. But the Henderson merger requires stability. The board needs assurance that Sterling Manufacturing has leadership that can be trusted long-term." His implication hung unspoken but clear trust her father had built. Trust she had supposedly squandered. Vivian stood, her movements deliberate. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, which is why I am addressing them directly." She pressed a button on the conference room panel. The double doors opened. Finn Carter walked in, his discomfort obvious in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes swept the room before settling on some neutral point on the far wall. He wore the same work jacket from the factory, cleaned but worn. Next to the directors in their $1,000 suits, he looked like an exhibit brought in for inspection. "This is Finn Carter," Vivian continued. "2 nights ago, he saved this company $20 million. He refused payment. He refused recognition. I am making him vice president of operations. Effective immediately." The room erupted. Directors spoke over each other, voices rising in disbelief and outrage. Clinton's smile vanished. "Vivian, this is absurd. The man has no credentials. No, he has integrity." Vivian cut through the noise. "Something this company desperately needs." She turned to Finn, who had remained silent through the chaos. "However, Mr. Carter, there is one condition." The room went quiet. Vivian's next words were delivered with the precision of a chess player moving a piece into checkmate. "Marry me, or be fired." Finn stared at her. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then, very quietly, "Excuse me, my father's will." Vivian explained, her voice steady despite the absurdity of what she was proposing. "Contains a clause to maintain controlling interest in the company. I must be married by the end of this month, December 31st. The board knows this. They are waiting for me to fail." She gestured at Clinton and the others. "You represent something they cannot argue against, a genuine hero with no connections to corporate politics. Our marriage would be a contract, 1 year. You receive a salary, housing, security for your daughter. I receive the legitimacy to keep this company out of their hands." Finn's expression remained unreadable. "And if I say no, then I honor the condition I stated. You are fired. You walk away. The company continues its current trajectory into the hands of men who will strip it for parts and sell it to the highest bidder." Vivian watched him carefully. "Or you help me save it. Not for me. For the 1,500 workers who depend on Sterling Manufacturing for their livelihoods." The silence stretched. Finally, Finn spoke, his voice carrying across the boardroom with unexpected force. "I won't sell my soul, not even for you." Clinton leaned back in his chair, satisfaction evident. He had been right. The maintenance worker was too proud, too stubborn. But Vivian did not flinch. Instead, she smiled a small, genuine expression that surprised even herself. "I am not asking you to sell anything, Mr. Carter. I am asking you to lend me your integrity for 1 year. The choice is yours." Finn looked at the directors, at Clinton's calculating expression, at Vivian's unwavering gaze. Then he thought about Callista, about the medical bills, about the workers who would lose their jobs if this company collapsed. 1 year, he said finally. "Contract only. No pretending beyond what is necessary for your board. And Callista's life stays normal. No publicity, no exploitation." "Agreed," Vivian said immediately. She extended her hand. Finn shook it. The deal was made. Clinton Ward's jaw tightened imperceptibly. This was not over, not by a long measure. The wedding took place in a sterile courthouse office 3 days later, witnessed by Helen Ross, Vivian's attorney, and a bored city clerk who processed the paperwork with mechanical efficiency. Finn wore a borrowed suit. Vivian wore a cream dress that cost more than his monthly rent. They signed documents, exchanged rings that Helen had purchased from a jewelry store that morning, and walked out into December cold as husband and wife. No celebration, no announcement, just a legal binding that felt more like a business merger than a marriage. Helen handed them both folders containing the terms of their arrangement, separate bedrooms, public appearances as needed, financial arrangements structured through trusts to protect both parties. "Congratulations," she said dryly. "Try not to kill each other before the year ends." The Sterling mansion occupied 3 acres in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, a limestone structure with more rooms than Finn could count on his first walkthrough. Staff members appeared and disappeared like ghosts, managing invisible systems that kept everything running without apparent effort. Callista held Finn's hand tightly as they climbed the main staircase to their assigned wing, 2 bedrooms connected by a shared sitting room, far enough from Vivian's quarters to maintain the fiction of separation. "Daddy, are we living in a castle?" Callista whispered, her eyes wide as she clutched her teddy bear. "Something like that," Finn murmured. He knelt beside his daughter, brushing snow-damp hair from her forehead. "Listen to me. This is temporary. 1 year. Then we go back to our normal life. Can you be brave for 1 year?" Callista nodded solemnly. "Like a soldier. Exactly like a soldier." Finn kissed her forehead. "Now let's unpack your things." The first 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Finn and Vivian existed in separate orbits, crossing paths mainly during mandatory appearances, a charity gala where they stood together for photographs, a company dinner where she placed her hand on his arm with practiced ease, a holiday party where he learned to smile through conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes. In private, they remained strangers. Vivian worked 16-hour days, her office a fortress of glass and steel. Finn spent his time learning the operations side of Sterling manufacturing, surprising the management team with his practical knowledge and his complete lack of interest in political maneuvering. He spoke with engineers and floor workers in language they understood, solving problems that had been ignored because they seemed beneath executive attention. But Clinton Ward watched everything. He collected small details the way Vivian and Finn never touched outside of public view. The separate bedrooms, the complete absence of intimacy in their interactions. He cultivated relationships with board members who resented Vivian's continued control, and he waited for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came on a Tuesday evening in early January. Callista developed a fever during dinner, her small body shaking with chills despite the mansion's perfect climate control. Finn carried her to her bedroom, his military training kicking in as he assessed symptoms temperature of 103 degrees, labored breathing, pale skin, asthma complication. He needed to get her to a hospital immediately. He called for a car, gathered Callista's emergency medication, and was halfway to the garage when Vivian appeared in the hallway. She had been working late in her home office, still dressed in her business suit. "What happened?" "Callista's sick. I am taking her to the hospital." Finn's voice was tight with controlled panic. "I am coming with you." Vivian grabbed her coat from a nearby closet. "You do not have to." "I am coming," she repeated, her tone brooking no argument. They drove through late evening traffic in tense silence, Callista cradled in Finn's lap, her breathing gradually worsening. At the hospital, Vivian used her name to bypass triage, getting Callista into an examination room within minutes. Doctors administered treatments, set up monitoring equipment, started an IV drip. The fever began to stabilize, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Finn settled into the uncomfortable chair beside Callista's bed, preparing for a long vigil. Vivian did not leave. She sat in the chair on the opposite side of the bed, her expensive coat folded carefully across her lap, her usual mask of control gradually dissolving as the hours passed. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and vanilla air freshener, a combination that failed to mask the underlying scent of illness and worry. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their harsh glare softened by the dimmer switch Finn had adjusted hours ago. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm, tracking Callista's improving vital signs. At 2 a.m, with Callista finally sleeping peacefully, her breathing regular and unlabored. Vivian spoke quietly. I had pneumonia when I was 8 years old. My father was closing a business deal in Chicago, something about manufacturing rights for automotive parts. My mother had already left us by then. She could not tolerate being married to a man who loved his work more than anything else. The housekeeper took me to the hospital alone, signed the paperwork, then left to handle some crisis at the house. I remember lying in a bed like this one, watching the door, waiting for someone to come and tell me everything would be fine, that I mattered more than contracts and quarterly reports. She paused, her voice steady but carrying weight. No one did. Not until the crisis had passed and I was well enough to be discharged. My father sent flowers afterward, expensive ones. The card said he was proud of how brave I had been. She looked at Callista's sleeping face, at the way Finn's hand rested protectively on his daughter's arm. I learned something important that week. People show love in the ways they know how. For my father, it was providing everything except presence. Finn studied Vivian in the dim hospital lighting, for the first time. He saw past the CEO, past the calculated moves and the corporate armor. He saw a woman who had learned early that she was alone in all the ways that mattered. I am sorry, he said simply. Do not be. It taught me to be strong. But her voice carried a tremor that suggested strength and loneliness might be the same thing. They stayed through the night, an accidental vigil that shifted something fundamental between them. When Callista woke at dawn, the first thing she saw was both of them, Finn on one side, Vivian on the other. Miss Vivian stayed, she asked, surprised and pleased. Yes, Vivian said softly. I stayed. The story should have ended there, a simple moment of unexpected connection. But Clinton Ward had been collecting evidence for weeks, and he was ready to deploy it. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. A tabloid website published photos of Finn and Vivian entering the courthouse on their wedding day, alongside investigative articles detailing their separate bedrooms, their lack of prior relationship, and speculation about the marriage being a cynical ploy to satisfy William Sterling's will. The headline screamed, "Billion-dollar bride CEO Vivian Sterling's fake marriage exposed." By noon, mainstream business networks had picked up the story. By afternoon, the board had called an emergency meeting. Finn found out about the scandal when his phone started buzzing with calls from reporters, somehow obtained his number. He was at the mansion, in the workshop he had set up in one of the unused outbuildings, helping Callista build a robot from salvaged parts, a project they called Second Chance, after the principle that broken things could be made useful again. She was painting gears with careful concentration when his phone lit up with the 10th call in 5 minutes. He checked the news. His stomach dropped. Vivian was already at Sterling Tower, surrounded by lawyers and advisors, all shouting contradictory strategies. Helen stood beside her, grim-faced. Clinton leaked the information to the press, Helen said bluntly. He has convinced 3 board members to call for a vote of no confidence. The meeting is in 2 hours. Can we prove he leaked it? Vivian asked. Proof takes time. Time we do not have. Helen looked at her steadily. Vivian, your father's will specified a marriage. It did not specify the marriage had to be genuine. Legally, you are still in compliance, but the board can argue bad faith. They can argue you violated the spirit of his wishes. Vivian sat in her office chair, the city spread below her like a chessboard where she had just lost her queen. Then it is over. Not quite. Helen pulled out her phone. There is one person who might be able to turn this around, but it depends on whether he chooses to fight or walk away. Finn Carter had every reason to walk away. The contract he had signed gave him an exit clause if the arrangement became public knowledge or endangered his daughter's well-being or privacy. Callista was safe, protected by the mansion's security and by the careful boundaries Finn had maintained despite the media circus. The year was barely started, only 8 weeks had passed since that courthouse ceremony. He could collect his contracted salary, return to his modest apartment in the industrial district, disappear back into the anonymous life he had known before Vivian Sterling offered him $10,000 in an envelope he had refused. No one would blame him. Most people would consider it the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that put his daughter first above all other considerations. He stood in the workshop, looking at the half-finished robot, at Callista's careful paint strokes on the gears they had salvaged from old machinery. She had chosen copper and silver, colors that caught the light and transformed something discarded into something beautiful. Second chances. The principle that broken things could be made useful again if someone took the time to see their value, to believe they deserved repair rather than replacement. He thought about Vivian sitting in a hospital chair at 2 a.m, speaking about a childhood where no one came when she needed them. He thought about the 1,500 workers at Sterling Manufacturing, people like him who did honest work and deserved better than corporate vultures picking over the remains of their livelihoods. He thought about the 9 words he had spoken in that boardroom: "I won't sell my soul, not even for you." And he realized those words had been a promise, not a refusal. Finn called Helen. "Tell Vivian I am not leaving. Tell her I will fight." The board meeting began at 3 o'clock, the room packed with directors, lawyers, and media representatives allowed in by Clinton's invitation. Vivian sat at the head of the table, her expression carved from ice, showing nothing. Clinton presented his case with theatrical flair, the timeline of the marriage, the courthouse ceremony, the separate bedrooms, the complete lack of prior relationship. "Vivian Sterling has made a mockery of her father's wishes," he concluded. "She has committed fraud against this board and against the shareholders who trusted William Sterling's judgment. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence and the transfer of controlling interest to the board pending investigation." 3 directors nodded in agreement. 2 more looked uncertain. Vivian needed a majority to survive. She was 2 votes short. Then the conference room doors opened. Finn Carter walked in, not in a borrowed suit but in his work clothes jeans, boots, the jacket he had worn the night he saved the factory. Behind him, Helen carried a tablet and a knowing smile. Finn walked to the front of the room and stood beside Vivian, his presence steady as stone. "My name is Finn Carter," he began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room with the clarity of someone accustomed to being heard over machinery and wind. "I am a maintenance worker. I did not go to business school. I do not understand stock portfolios or hostile takeovers or most of the language you people use in these rooms. But I understand people. I understand the difference between someone who sees a problem and someone who sees an opportunity to profit from it. And I understand when someone is trying to steal something that does not belong to them." He looked directly at Clinton, whose expression had shifted from confident to wary. "You talk about fraud, about mockery. You say Vivian married me to satisfy a contract, to manipulate her father's will for personal gain. You are right about one thing. She did marry me for the contract. And I agreed because I thought 1 year of my life was a fair trade for saving 1,500 jobs, people who work on factory floors, who go home with sore backs and calloused hands, who deserve better than watching their livelihoods auctioned off to the highest bidder." He paused, letting the silence settle. "But something happened I did not expect. I learned who Vivian Sterling actually is. Not the CEO whose face appears in business magazines. Not the name on a building or a quarterly report. The woman who sat beside my daughter's hospital bed all night. Not because cameras were watching or because it served some strategic purpose, but because she remembers what it feels like to be alone when you are scared. The woman who works 16-hour days not because she loves power or money, but because she refuses to let her father's life work be destroyed by people who only see dollar signs where he saw legacy and responsibility. The room had gone absolutely silent. Finn continued. Mr. Ward calls our marriage a fraud. I call it the most honest thing in this room. Because unlike him, Vivian never lied about what she needed. She told me the truth. She asked for help, and I am choosing freely to give it. He turned to Vivian. Not because of a contract, not because of money, because you are worth fighting for. Vivian stared at him, something cracking in her carefully maintained composure. Finn looked back at Clinton. So before you vote to remove her, ask yourself something. Who is really committing fraud here? The woman trying to save a company, or the man trying to steal it? Helen stepped forward, her tablet displaying forensic email logs and financial records. While we are discussing fraud, she said pleasantly, perhaps the board would like to review these documents showing Mr. Ward's communications with Henderson Industries, negotiating a private sale of Sterling manufacturing assets, while simultaneously advising this board that no sale was viable. Or these records showing offshore accounts receiving funds that oddly correspond with company losses over the past 18 months. She smiled. Finn is right. The fraud is real. You have just been looking at the wrong person. Clinton's face went white. Directors began shouting questions, demanding explanations. Clinton stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. This is fabricated. Legal will show. Legal already has. Helen interrupted. The FBI will be contacting you shortly. I believe they call it embezzlement and corporate espionage. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Security escorted Clinton from the building. Directors who had supported him suddenly remembered prior commitments elsewhere. William Sterling's will stood intact. Vivian retained control of the company. But for Finn and Vivian, the victory felt secondary to something else that had shifted in that boardroom the moment when a contract had transformed into something resembling a choice. That evening, Vivian found Finn in the workshop with Callista, adding the final pieces to their robot. Second Chance stood on the workbench, a assemblage of salvaged gears and repurposed circuits that somehow added up to something whole. Does it work? Vivian asked. We will find out. Finn flipped a switch. The robot's LED eyes lit up. Its gears began turning with a soft, mechanical purr. Callista clapped in delight. Finn smiled. Looks like broken things can work again after all. Vivian watched the robot, then looked at Finn. Thank you for what you said in the boardroom. You did not have to. Yes, I did. Finn met her eyes. Met her because it was true. They stood in the workshop, surrounded by tools and sawdust, Callista humming as she adjusted the robot's movements. Outside, snow fell again, the kind of December storm that made everything quiet and new. Vivian realized she had spent so many years building walls that she had forgotten what it felt like when someone chose to stay on her side of them. The contract said 1 year, she said quietly. It did. Finn agreed. What if we amended it? To what? Vivian smiled. A genuine expression free of calculation or control. To however long it takes to find out if this is real. Finn considered this. Then he smiled back. I think we can work with that. 3 months later. On a Tuesday afternoon when spring had begun to challenge winter's grip on the city, William Sterling's attorney arrived at the mansion with final paperwork regarding the will. He found Finn and Vivian in the kitchen, cooking dinner together while Callista did homework at the table, her teddy bear propped beside her books like a study companion. The kitchen smelled of garlic and herbs, of something simmering on the stove that required attention and patience. It was a far cry from the formal dining room where staff had served meals on china during those first awkward weeks. The attorney presented the document an official letter from the estate, confirming that all conditions had been satisfied, that Vivian's position was secure, that the marriage clause had been fulfilled according to both letter and spirit of William Sterling's last wishes. He also carried a sealed envelope addressed to Finn, its paper yellowed slightly with age, suggesting it had been written years before. William left instructions, the attorney explained, adjusting his glasses as he consulted his notes. This was to be delivered once the marriage had lasted 6 months, and only if certain other conditions were met specifically, that you had chosen to remain beyond the minimum requirements of the contract. Finn opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note in William Sterling's distinctive script. If you are reading this, you chose to stay. That means my daughter found what I hoped she would find, someone who sees her value beyond the company name. Thank you for proving I was right. Welcome to the family. Truly. Finn showed the note to Vivian. She read it twice. Her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. He knew, she whispered. He knew all along this might happen. He wanted you to have a choice, Finn said gently. Not just a contract, a real choice. That evening, they sat together on the mansion's back terrace, watching snow fall across the gardens while Callista played inside with the robot they had built. Vivian leaned against Finn's shoulder, a gesture that would have been impossible 3 months ago. Do you regret it? She asked. Saying yes that day in the boardroom. Finn thought about the question seriously. He thought about the hospital vigil, about standing before the board, about watching Vivian slowly let her guard down piece by piece. He thought about Callista's laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. No, he said finally. I don't regret it at all. Neither do I. Vivian reached for his hand. Thank you for teaching me that not everything worth having comes with a contract. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes taking a chance on someone is the same thing as giving yourself a second chance. Finn squeezed her hand gently. Above them, stars appeared between snow clouds, bright points in the winter darkness. Inside, Callista called for them to come see what the robot had learned to do. They stood together, walked back into the warm house, into the life they were building one careful choice at a time. The contract had been signed, but what they were creating now was something no legal document could contain. A family formed not by obligation, but by the deliberate decision to stay, to trust, to believe that broken things could become whole again if given the chance. And in the workshop, Second Chance continued its mechanical dance, proof that even salvaged parts could find new purpose when someone took the time to see their value.